love the way he's laughing at that. Hello again, I'm Mark McIntire, and welcome back to Freedom Matters. Here we drill down into the basic principles and values of human freedom. And we interview thought leaders and global influencers on the problem of freedom and human values. Today my guest is Mr. Troy Worden. You may have seen him on other programs, and he is a dedicated defender of freedom, and I'm happy to have him on the show. As you'll see during the next hour, Troy has been well prepared to confront all of the threats to freedom that we seem to be facing today, especially freedom of speech, and especially on college campuses. Because as you see, Troy was the former president of the Berkeley College Republicans in 2017. You may have seen the footage of the fires and the disturbances. That's when a well-organized gang of thugs violently shut down the conservative speakers that Troy and his college Republicans had invited to speak at the campus. People like Milo Yiannopoulos, I always trip over that one, David Horowitz, friend of mine, Ann Coulter, and Ben Shapiro. Troy has appeared on Fox News, Fox Business, CNN. He's even been on CNN, NRA TV. And as a journalist, he has contributed articles to Campus Reform, the Washington Examiner, and I can tell you from personal experience, the Daily Signal. So Troy, welcome to the show. Actually,
Pleasure.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Troy actually was gracious enough to do the pilot for this program, Freedom Matters, and I guess I owe my career entirely to you, because without that pilot, we never would have got hired at this station.
Well, I'm glad I could be of some use to someone.
Well, that and a check, that's actually what got us on here. So anyway, we want to start with what we always do with our guests, and that is, what are your basic principles and values of human freedom?
Well, I think that freedom historically has been understood as something that's a negative right. In other words, freedom from tyranny, not freedom to do whatever you want. Freedom from restrictive speech laws, not the freedom to say whatever you want. And I think if we keep this in mind, we get a much clearer, productive definition of what freedom is, what free speech is, and what our Constitution was actually designed to do. It was to protect us from abuses by the federal government, not to give us the right to do whatever we want, to harm anyone, to say whatever we want. No society can operate with an absolute freedom in that sense. It's called anarchy. So I think that the Constitution is actually designed, again, to prevent abuse. It presupposes that there is an order to society, civil society, but also within the family and many other aspects of life. So I think the issue we have today is that young people think, when they hear the word freedom or liberty, they have a libertarian conception of what it means. They think it means that you can, again, live your life without any kind of moral restrictions, without any kind of restrictions on where you want to go in life. And I think that, again, if people have a clear understanding of what freedom really means, there were these misconceptions about the Constitution would stop floating around, and people would take more seriously threats to our rights and threats to freedom, such as socialism, communism, and things like that.
So you make a distinction between freedom from and freedom to.
Yes, this is the academic writer and essayist Isaiah Berlin's distinction. Yeah. And it was hugely influential back in its day, and I wish people would talk about it more.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, your definition of freedom is not license. It's not a libertine notion. You're not free to do what you wish to do. You have made an agreement with the state that you live in, with the society that you live in, that you're going to abide by certain rules, very much like why Socrates drank the poison, because the jailhouse was open and he could have walked out. In fact, they wanted him to walk out. But he said, no, I've made a contract with the state and I have broken their laws. They have found so. I don't agree that I broke the law, but they say I broke the law, so I'm going to drink the poison. So the correlation to freedom you seem to be suggesting is a responsibility. What about that responsibility? How do you see that responsibility playing out in your life, in your work?
Well, I think there's a pretty wide gap between the Marquis de Sade and Thomas Jefferson regarding
I would say so, yeah.
their conception of liberty.
Yeah.
I think that, again, you're right, freedom implies responsibility, obligations. Morality is fundamentally about obligations, what we owe to ourselves, what we owe to one another, what we owe to, say, a deity like God. And the way I see responsibility and obligations playing out in my work as a free speech advocate on one of the most liberal college campuses in the country, UC Berkeley, I felt that I had an obligation in 2017 to challenge the hegemonic, really thought prison that Berkeley had become. You couldn't, for fear of your life, for fear of your physical safety, for fear of your reputation, for fear of your sanity, voice a conservative opinion without suffering a torrent of abuse, of slander, of harassment, of stalking, of destruction of private property, and threats against your life. I thought that this was a grave injustice to not only to me, but also to anyone who has an opinion that runs contrary to those of the administrators or the student body at large.
So it wasn't just the voicing of a conservative point of view. Any non-liberal point of view, any non-liberal progressive point of view, that was in danger of being suppressed. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Take, for instance, a few months ago, a student at the university named Isabella Chow. She was a student senator. She wasn't a member of any political group or party on campus. She had the gall to simply state her belief that man and women, that gender is only divisible by two. There are men and women. And that's why she couldn't support a certain provision that was up for a vote regarding transgender rights.
Now, she was on the student senate. She was on the student council.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. But that, again, that's really an apolitical organization. You can't divide it up by Republican or Democrat.
It's supposed to be nonpartisan.
Exactly, and she was simply voicing her conscience. And she,
Now, they forced her out to resign. They forced her to resign?
No, but she suffered hundreds of people protesting her. And keep in mind, she wasn't seeking attention. She wasn't courting controversy. But merely the fact that she stated her private beliefs publicly in order to justify why she abstained from a vote. Keep in mind, she didn't vote against this resolution on transgender rights. She was ostracized. She was attacked by the community that she was seeking to work with and benefit.
Merely by advocating what any biology class will tell you, there are just two genders.
Exactly, and what has happened at Berkeley, which is a world-renowned scientific institution, research institution.
With many Nobel laureates.
Exactly, and this prestigious university, the #1 public university in the world, is denying science. They have become anti-science because they have accepted this ideology that really denies anything that goes against certain victimized groups. And transgender persons are for all intents and purposes, one of those groups. You can't say anything against them, or else you will, again, face a protest, ostracization, stalking, things like that.
Now, apparently there's no limit to the number of genders, according to the liberal progressive mindset. I think there are, 7 billion people on the planet, so there must be 7 billion genders. Would that seem to follow?
Well, that's the troubling thing, because if you go into a discipline like, say, biology or even agriculture, we know that farm animals have only 2 genders. Humans, likewise, conform to that model of reproduction and division. If you go into an anthropology class, you're taught the opposite. You're taught that gender is on a spectrum. You're taught that people can be hermaphrodites, that people can merely identify as a certain gender regardless of their biological sex, and all the social implications of this gender fluidity are simply waved away. And any objection raised to it is regarded as some kind of parochial prejudice that needs to be wiped out.
Now, you attended Berkeley for 4 years?
Yes.
4 years, okay. When you started as a freshman, how did you conceptualize, how did you think of yourself as, not just politically, but morally? I mean, how did you conceptualize yourself? What were your ideas about human freedom as a freshman, and how did it evolve along the way to when you finally, in 2017, were the object of a thug group called Antifa that would try to destroy your life.
Well, I would say, luckily, I was a conservative coming into Berkeley. I knew exactly what I was stepping into. I often got in spirited debates with my high school teachers, most of whom were liberal, on political topics, especially during the second Obama term. And I never had an issue. People vehemently disagreed with me, but they still treated me as a human being who had rights just like anyone else. When I went to Berkeley, I initially wasn't very political. Politics for me was more of a pastime than an occupation.
Really?
And I came to Berkeley with pretty much similar views as I left it. In other words, experiencing what the far left had in store for anyone that dissented only confirmed to me my own beliefs and made me commit to them even more. So I knew it was wrong to assault someone because they expressed an opinion you found distasteful. And I left Berkeley with that same opinion.
Now, in your view, Troy, what's the argument for the other side? What try to make their best argument. If you were their lawyer, all right? If you were their lawyer, how would you make the best case for saying that because you have the wrong opinion, let's say about gender, you say there are only two genders. Well, that's obviously wrong. So therefore, because you're expressing an incorrect idea, therefore you have no right to speak that idea. How do they defend this? I don't get it. I don't understand.
Well, I am glad that you brought up the idea of steel manning, which I think is a term Sam Harris, the popular atheist, has put out there into the public discourse.
Right.
What I've heard from administrators, from faculty, from students, my peers, they believe that speech itself, the actual speech act, is an act of violence. They think that speaking certain ideas psychologically, if not socially, harms other people. And so they believe that they're doing a moral thing by shutting me down, and the conservative speakers I invited. They think that shutting down Milo Yiannopoulos, by shutting down Ann Coulter, by shutting down David Horowitz and Ben Shapiro, they think that by silencing these people, they are actually doing a public service.
Much like the Grand Inquisitors who of the Catholic Church who actually burned people, hung them, burned them at the stake to shut them up because they were expressing ideas that were contrary to the Catholic religion. So in a weird way, the Antifa crowd, the crowd that you had to deal with, who tried to shut you down and shut Milo down and Ben Shapiro and Ann Coulter, in a weird way, they are reaching way back to the Middle Ages, which I think would come as quite a surprise to them if they had to think about it that way, right?
Well, the contemporary left has become the new Victorians. These are the fainting couch feminists. These are the liberals who get into conniption fits just because you have a poster that says something they don't like. These are the people who will punch you in the face if you express an opinion that they view morally repugnant.
Right.
And it's gotten to a point now where people live in fear to say anything contrary to the reigning opinion on campus. Many comedians.
Bill Maher was talking about that the other day.
Bill Maher, Jerry Seinfeld, they don't do college campuses anymore.
Not anymore, no.
Because college campuses are no longer funny places.
They're not free speech zones.
George Orwell had a quote, and I've heard it used many a time in relation to free speech. Every joke is a tiny revolution. In other words, laughter is one of the most powerful weapons you can use against tyrants.
That's why I laugh a lot.
Exactly
why I laugh a lot, yeah.
So if you want to preserve freedom, you also have to preserve laughter. And the decline of comedy on college campuses and in the culture in general is an indication that we have taken a turn for the worst. Now, nothing can be joked about because you'll lose your job, you'll be harassed, people make death threats against you. You just have to look at the current political situation. For instance, the Kavanaugh hearings. And you can see how baseless accusations and slander will be leveled at you if you, again, express an opinion that other people don't agree with.
Now, in the most recent instance at Berkeley, by the way, I think some of our viewers are not aware of the fact that in 1967, I believe it was, the free speech movement in America on college campuses was started at Berkeley College, Berkeley University, by a young man by the name of Mario Savio. And in fact, there are steps there at Sproul Plaza, I believe.
Yes.
There are a set of steps with his name emblazoned on it, and it talks about he was the one who birthed the free speech movement in college campuses. And this is the very place now where speech is shut down, not by the administration, which is what Mario Savio was opposed to, and which all of Americans thought was wrong because it's against the Constitution. And now you have groups of students, some on campus and some who don't even belong on campus, coming on campus and actually shutting down speakers who are there to present ideas with which they disagree.
Well, I would say the administration is still working to shut down conservative speech, not directly, but indirectly. And I think it works like this. The administration and the police department on campus and in the city of Berkeley, they're not committed to allowing conservatives to speak easily and freely on campus or in their city, because the people that are voting for them and the people they have to live with every day are the far left, are so-called anti-fascists or Antifa. So, in other words, they have a reason to make it as hard as possible for conservatives to let their voice be heard on campus. And so what the university has done is place a lot of restrictions that they created clandestinely without consulting conservatives or liberals in order to clamp down on free speech. It got so bad that we actually, the Berkeley College Republicans and the Young America's Foundation, had to sue the university. We, in the fall of last year, actually obtained a settlement from the university, and they did away with their restrictive free speech policies. But the fact of the matter is that administrators are working with these activists to ensure that conservatives have the hardest time possible speaking on campuses.
Just briefly, if you could walk our viewers through the process that any student club has to go through to get money and permission from the university to bring a speaker on, any speaker at all. If you could just walk us through that, because a lot of folks out there really don't understand how the process works and where the money actually comes from. So.
Well, the Berkeley College Republicans spent many sleepless nights trying to get the administration to give us a venue, which we have to apply for. We also have to wait for the police department to conduct an audit to tell us how much security is going to cost for the event. We also have to pay for access to microphones, speakers, things of that sort. And again, the primary problem at Berkeley was that the university was either not giving us a venue on the main campus, or they were giving us a venue at too late a time at night or too early a time at night when students wouldn't be able to attend. And we also had to deal with excessive, exorbitant, what we call free speech taxes. In other words, security fees. The security fees for Ben Shapiro and Milo Yiannopoulos were outrageous. And the university either paid for them or lowered them, reduced them. And the only way that the Berkeley College Republicans could even afford to invite speakers like, say, Ben Shapiro or Ann Coulter was through Young America's Foundation. They generously provided us with financial support in order to pay the speakers honoraria and also the security fees.
Oh, so taxpayer money was not used to bring these people to the campus.
No, but taxpayer money, many millions of dollars were expended cleaning up the mess that these far-left activist administrators
That's what I was going for.
Drummed up.
Berkeley is a publicly funded taxpayer public school, and therefore a lot of our viewers don't realize that they're actually paying for the disruption and the suppression of free speech when this sort of thing happens that happened to you and the College Republicans.
Let me address this complaint. Oftentimes people have told me that campus conservatives are the reason why we don't have enough money for students.
Why is that?
Well, they say why are you inviting controversial speakers to campus?
Because it's a college.
And causing riots.
Because it's a university. That's what you do at universities.
Well, what I would tell these people is, if you're having riots in your city because a conservative is coming to speak on campus, that's a reflection on the culture there. And that if you can't have someone speak their mind without causing a riot, there's obviously a problem, a breakdown of civil society, not just a violation of civil rights, the right to free speech, but an actual degradation and a decline in public discourse to the point of violence. Because what happens when you can't have a discussion? You have violence. And if we're at that point, then I don't think there's much hope for America. I think Berkeley really was a microcosm of what was happening across the country at large. I think what happened at Berkeley is what happened at Charlottesville and many other cities. People refused to engage in discussion, and they decided to resort to violence. I think that we should be willing to pay the money necessary to establish order in cities like these, to allow the police to do their job. Because keep in mind, the university and the police chief and the mayor many times told the police to stand down in certain instances, and that resulted in the hospitalization of friends and acquaintances of mine. And again, this isn't even about free speech at a certain point. It's about the physical safety of American citizens.
Well, on that topic, because I know that you had to hire your own attorney to get the settlement that a court had adjudicated for you, but they didn't pay. It's time really to explain to our viewers what this word Antifa means. Who is Antifa? What are they? And how do they operate?
Antifa stands for anti-fascist.
Anti-fascist.
Now, this is how these people refer to themselves. I think it's a tad ironic, because they're the ones going around shutting people down. And if they could, I'm sure they would burn books, especially Ann Coulter's or Ben Shapiro's. The anti-fascist movement began in Germany in the 1920s in order to combat the fascist party. After the war, it really manifested, I think, in the 80s in West Germany as sort of an anarcho-communist movement. These people would fight the police en masse in what they call the Black Bloc. That's a tactic whereby people get together, they dress in black, they wear masks so their identity is concealed, and they go around basically terrorizing the streets and fighting with the police. So that's what the Black Bloc was doing in Europe in the 80s. The Antifa movement really only came to prominence in the U.S. in the late 1990s, especially with the 1999 World Trade Organization conference in Seattle.
In Seattle, yes, I remember that. That's the first time we saw them.
And there were riots, exactly what we saw in Berkeley in 2017. And really, I think Antifa has enjoyed a renaissance since the election of Donald Trump. These people feel emboldened to take to the streets and bloody the faces and bodies of conservatives, because they know there's so much liberal animus to conservatives in cities such as Berkeley and also San Jose, for instance. Anytime Trump is in the liberal consciousness, anytime he deranges them, Trump derangement syndrome it's called, they feel emboldened. And lo and behold, the law enforcement and these liberal administrators of universities and liberal mayors really don't care. They will let the Antifa run amok. I think Portland is a great example. The mayor there has really taken the side of Antifa, and the city has gone downhill. I can't tell you how many times I've seen stories come out of that city where conservatives are being violently harassed and beaten by mobs of black-clad Antifa protesters.
Now, is Antifa an actual organization? How are they organized? They're everywhere. They're in every major college and university city, and they seem to be able to, snap their fingers and mobilize a mob dressed in black, faces covered, bike locks and chains in hand, and show up to, let's say, Ann Coulter is invited to speak or whatever, or Ben Shapiro, and they seem to be able to shut this down. How are they organized? Is it a loose organization, or is there a central committee?
It's
Is there a
definitely
Politburo? I mean,
the problem with Antifa is it really is a decentralized organization.
oh, it's a decentralized organization.
So pretty much, if you're in a certain community, especially these liberal subgroups, these far left subgroups, the punk scene, you can be a member, and it really is a mass participatory movement. And these people who want to cause havoc on the streets, oftentimes criminals, will use this as cover to express their rage against society and break some windows and some heads. I think ultimately Antifa is not a street gang. What I found ridiculous in the city of Berkeley was that the city council or local law enforcement designated them as a street gang. The problem is that really doesn't free up the resources necessary to deal with this problem, because it is a national problem. I think they're a political terrorist organization. The actions that they have committed against me and my friends and other conservatives across the country are abhorrent. They don't just amount to simple street battles. They actually result in continued and prolonged harassment and stalking, the releasing of public information online. I've had employers get libelous emails. I've had friends who were associated with the Berkeley College Republicans who've been fired from their job. I've had friends of mine who've been punched in the face, who've been stalked and harassed repeatedly. I've had friends who've had their property staked out by these people, who've received death threats. I think Antifa should be classified as a terrorist organization by the FBI, and I think they should be pursued by any means necessary, legally, of course, in order to clamp down on this lawlessness. This really isn't a political problem. This is a criminal issue, and it should be addressed in any civil first world country.
Now, I'd like you to explain to the viewers, if you could please, I know you have hired a lawyer, and there is a court case, and you are trying to recover money that has been ordered to be paid to you. So I don't know much more than that. So I want to give you the opportunity to describe the court case that you're involved in, and to direct people to your GoFundMe page if they want to help. So can you describe briefly, sketch it out for us? Who are you suing, or who's suing you, or what money is involved, and how did this all happen?
Certainly. In the fall of 2017, a woman by the name of Yvette Falarka, a 42-year-old middle school teacher
She's a teacher?
Yes, a middle school teacher in Berkeley. She's a member of one of the more prominent Antifa organizations that operate publicly rather than clandestinely, called By Any Means Necessary, or BAM for short.
Oh, okay.
She filed a frivolous restraining order against me. Now keep in mind, I'm half her age, I have no criminal record. She currently is facing, at the moment, multiple criminal charges stemming from different events in 2016 and 17. Among them, charges of inciting a riot and resisting arrest.
But why did she file a charge against you? What did she?
I think she did it for...
Did you look at her the wrong way? Is that what?
Tactical reasons.
Tactical reasons.
So I was the president of the Berkeley College Republicans at the time the restraining order was filed. I think what she wanted to do was deprive me of my First and Second Amendment rights. So as long as you have a restraining order, and especially if it's a permanent restraining order, you cannot own a firearm.
What was she? What is she trying to restrain? What were you doing that she was trying to restrain?
Well, I was expressing opinions that she didn't like.
And did she get the restraining order?
Yes. Even though she had filed multiple frivolous restraining orders that were dismissed in the past in the Alameda County Justice Department, the court system, she was granted that restraining order. I had to go to court and obtain an attorney and fight it. And the moment we started fighting, they dropped the case. Now, the judge awarded us $10,000 in damages.
Right.
But we're still waiting on the appeals process in order to actually even receive that money.
So she's appealing it.
Exactly. Yeah. And we don't know how long the case is going to go on. But the problem is, as we're waiting here, sitting here, my legal expenses are also increasing, simply because she's delaying the process. She has a pro bono civil rights attorney that she flew out from the state of Michigan, continuing these legal proceedings and basically hamstringing me personally, financially. And so the only way that I can cover these expenses is by fundraising. Now, my attorney is a very good attorney, Harmeet Dhillon of the Dhillon Law Group in San Francisco. And she's also taken on many other notable conservative causes and clients, among them attendees of the Trump rally in 2016 in San Jose who were attacked by Antifa. And which, again, the city and the police department there allowed that to happen. So
she's also representing Hayden Williams, who was actually assaulted physically, punched in the face. I think President Trump called attention to that at the CPAC convention.
Yes, and she's also representing James Damore, the author of the Google memo.
Really? Oh,
yes.
I didn't know that. She's representing James Damore.
Yes, and
another notorious offensive person. I mean, his crime was what? He actually said that there were gender issues in
the tech industry.
The tech industry.
And
he
for
wrote
that, he
this
was
famous
fired.
memo, and he was fired because he sort of outed the protection of gender policies within the company.
Well, you know, you have plenty of experience with being fired for wrongthink, but
yeah.
But Harmeet has also represented the Berkeley College Republicans and the Young America's Foundation in our free speech lawsuit against UC Berkeley. So we're very confident that we can obtain the damages that we need from these legal
by that
proceedings.
time, by that time, you
exactly.
You'll be. They're making you spend money. They're making you raise money, and they're making you spend money as a way to suppress your speech.
And I think this is also another topic that hasn't received enough attention, which is the abuse of the justice system to clamp down the free speech rights of conservatives. Someone who has a pro bono civil rights attorney who can at will file frivolous lawsuits and restraining orders against people they don't like for political reasons, that person has an immense amount of power, and they're abusing the justice system. And I think that this deserves more attention. I think that if the public demanded that these kind of things be prevented in the future, we wouldn't see this kind of legal abuse. So not only is my personal safety and my peace of mind threatened daily by these people, I'm also threatened financially and legally as well.
I want to go back, rewind our discussion a little bit, because I know you've been reading a lot and educating yourself, because these things are not taught anymore in schools. The only thing that's taught now is Marxism. So I know that you have learned how to learn on your own, and that's why you're a highly literate individual. But I want to go back to the foundations of American conservatism as you see it. And I wanted to ask you about the writings of Russell Kirk. Because it seems to me that Russell Kirk, from what I've been able to glean from him, he really is the grandfather of the American conservative movement. What's your view of the American conservative movement? How did it evolve? How did it get to be what it is today? People often think it's Bill Buckley, but Buckley comes after Russell Kirk. Can you give us the benefit of your study about how American conservatism actually evolved?
Well, you can't understand the Trump phenomenon without understanding the roots of conservatism in America, and without understanding a figure like Russell Kirk. Russell Kirk would probably most closely identify with the paleo-conservative tradition in America, not the neoconservative
tradition. Is that
tradition.
the paleo diet?
No,
that's different.
no,
From the paleo
no.
diet. Okay.
But some paleo-conservatives are fairly green in their thinking.
And why do they call them paleo? Because they're old?
Yes, yes. The original distinction between old and new conservatives in the 30s and 40s were those conservatives who were against the New Deal, the paleo-conservatives, and those who were for it, the new conservatives. And that division has essentially lasted through the last century, and it's also manifested itself in this century. Figures like Pat Buchanan and Russell Kirk have been saying the same things Trump has been saying for many, many decades. And it's only in this most recent election that they've actually come to a head and finally received the recognition they rightly deserve. Paleo-conservatives like Russell Kirk believe that conservatism is more than just spreading democracy across the world. That's what neoconservatives like Bill Kristol, and to an extent Charles Krauthammer, those are the kind of views that they espoused. Paleo-conservatives tend to be anti-war, anti-interventionist, closer to Rand Paul in political ideology. They enjoy limited government. They place an extreme amount of emphasis on civil society and the family and how those things operate in lieu of government. And
so they tend to be more libertarian, closer to the libertarian mindset. Than they would be to the neoconservative.
In a sense, but they also, I would say, don't believe in unrestricted and unfettered markets, because paleo-conservatives often understand that not everything that can be bought and sold is necessarily morally right. Right. Yeah. So I think Roger Scruton has a good discussion on this subject when he says when he discusses prostitution. Prostitution, if you're a libertarian, there's nothing really wrong with that, because everything can be bought and sold as long as both parties consent.
Well, as Thomas Aquinas once remarked, he said, better that the prostitute should earn a living than a virgin should be raped.
But at least there you had a moral argument, right?
Yeah.
Libertarians tend to claim that they're amoralists in pretty much everything as long as the principle of consent is observed.
Now, this Russell Kirk individual, I don't think a lot of our viewers actually have had the pleasure and the opportunity to read Russell Kirk, but I just wanted to read something from the website, the Russell Kirk Institute, their website. And this is a brief description by Russell Kirk himself. He talks about 10 principles of being a conservative. It may shock people and surprise people to hear something like, being neither a religion nor an ideology, the body of opinion termed conservative possesses no holy writ, no das Kapital to provide dogmata. So far as it is possible to determine what conservatives believe, the first principles of conservatism, of conservative persuasion, are derived from what leading conservative writers and public people have professed during the last 2 decades. After some introductory remarks to this general thing, he then talks about the principles. He says, perhaps it would be well, and this is really where I don't think most people would identify this as conservative, what I'm about to read. I don't think a lot of people out there. He said, perhaps it would be well most of the time to use the word conservative as an adjective, chiefly, for there exists no model conservative. There's no Platonic essence of conservative. There's no, perfect conservative. And conservatism is the negation of ideology. It is a state of mind, a type of character, a way of looking at the civil social order. Now, I don't think many people would imagine that Donald Trump or even Ronald Reagan, or even, if I'll push the envelope further, even Bill Buckley were conservatives in that sense. Because it seems that most people think that conservatism is a body of dogmas.
Which I think is a mistake, and it leads people into rather harebrained discussions or unproductive discussions, quite frankly. I think what Russell Kirk had in mind was a definition of conservatism as an attitude rather than an ideology. And ideology tends to restrict people's ability to deal with the world because the world has to be filtered through that ideology in order to be presented to them as something that's meaningful to be discussed. In other words, ideology always frames discussions a certain way, and that can cause you to lose insight and maybe even avoid the problem entirely. I think Russell Kirk in particular envisioned American conservatism as a tradition since before the country's founding even, a tradition that placed an emphasis on order in society and also transcendent principles, as you mentioned earlier. In other words, a belief in something beyond just this material existence, and that as a motivator for structuring society the way we do. So in other words, what Kirk presents is a mere image of what the modern left also espouses. They say that there is nothing transcendent. There's only a material world. We're only atoms bouncing around in a void.
Yes.
And essentially any social phenomena we observe are not based on anything immaterial or non-material. They're simply social constructs. So in other words, Russell Kirk, I think at a more fundamental level, was attempting to save us from this nihilism and pessimism of materialism, which the left gleefully espouses.
So since the left actually does not believe in any objective morality, they do not believe in any objective principles and values of freedom, they do not believe in any objective worldview, so they have nothing to hang their hat on, even their own thinking that they are correct on racial issues, on sexual issues, on educational issues, on political policy issues, border issues, immigration issues. They insist that they're correct, but if you drill down, if you ask them to drill down, on what principles do you stand? They said, well, that's just what we believe. We're a tribe.
Well, it's pure emotivism on the left, and that's why they so quickly had recourse to violence instead of discussion, because they know that by their own ideology, they actually have no principles on which they stand and on which they can justify their beliefs. If you speak to any liberal, they clearly believe in right and wrong, but they don't want to admit it. They want to say that the only thing that matters is consent and what you believe and what you feel. It doesn't matter about objective reality.
No, that's right, because in order to punch you in the face, in order to stop you from speaking and allow me to punch you in the face, you have to be wrong. But therein lies the contradiction, is it not? Since they have no basic objective principles, they can't claim that they're objectively correct, and therefore I can punch you in the face.
Well, and also their definition of freedom is again incoherent. They say that everyone should be free to choose their own gender, but at the same time, they think that you shouldn't have the right to speak against that kind of point of view. So at the end of the day, really, we're stuck in this situation that the existentialist philosophers like Nietzsche and Sartre realized, and Kierkegaard, which was that man cannot help but reason morally and analyze the world from a moral point of view. There's always going to be some kind of moral ideal against which we're going to judge reality, and we're going to use that ideal to orient ourselves in the world and to dictate how we act.
Yeah.
And the left wants to have their cake and eat it too. They're speaking out of both sides of their mouth on this issue. They want to say that there is no right and wrong, but at the same time they vehemently want to establish their own moral rectitude.
They wrap themselves in righteous indignation, as Alex Madagian would say, right?
So essentially, you have to go through a certain number of years of education to believe in this nonsense, and it takes someone like Russell Kirk to, as you said, drill down to the core issue here, which is that it's bad philosophy at the end of the day. It's bad philosophy with regard to the left's ideology. They don't have a coherent position philosophically on most of these issues, and not only is it leading them to muddle up philosophical problems and spout falsehoods, it's also causing them to react violently because they find themselves in a situation where argument is impossible.
Can you address the issue of many intelligent people, educated people, think that Marxism, the root of what we're talking about here, they think that Marxism is purely isolated on the economics issue. But we now know that because of the changes in attitudes about ethnicity, borders, sexuality, we now know that Marxism has now been transported into all of the other academic disciplines, especially the humanities, and especially the largest oxymoron that's ever been created in human history, social science. So can you drill down? I mean, you had lunch with Roger Scruton, the British philosopher who wrote famously Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands, which is all about how tracing Marxism evolved into and got threaded, woven into the American educational experience. So can you I mean, your own thoughts on that?
Well, it's true. Marx was definitely more concerned with economics than culture. He actually thought that culture was simply a superstructure that hung on to the skeleton of a society's economic system. Later Marxist thinkers, beginning with Antonio Gramsci and culminating with the Frankfurt School, realized that they really couldn't affect communist revolutions in capitalist societies. So instead they turned their gaze on culture. They thought that they could win a culture war using Marxist ideology. So what the Frankfurt School did, and what they continue to do through the many academics that adhere to their ideology, what they do is essentially analyze culture from a Marxist point of view. I am an English literature major. I studied English literature at UC Berkeley. And
I should have said that. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I should have mentioned that.
I should be ashamed of it, really. Essentially, what I learned in my English courses was a lot of Freud and Marx. Freud and Marx, even though the economic and psychology departments respectively don't have much respect for these thinkers, Freud and Marx are the mainstays of any kind of liberal education in literature in America.
You got to throw Wittgenstein in there too.
More in the philosophy department.
Yeah, you got to throw Wittgenstein, who said the limit of my world is the limit of my language, or the other way around. The limit of my language is the limit of my world. In other words, there's nothing beyond language, which leads to postmodernism, where all we have is language. We just have text, and it just refers to itself.
Well, I'll give the Marxists credit. At least they're more coherent than the postmodernists.
They are. Yeah, the Marxists do a much better job at hijacking academic disciplines than do the postmoderns.
So, for instance, instead of analyzing the moral intricacies of a Shakespearean play like The Merchant of Venice,
right?
Instead of talking about the moral matters conveyed in the play, we'll talk about the economic system.
Oppression.
The oppression of certain persons, groups, victims. Right. We focus on gender, we focus on the class structure, we focus on strangely enough, the homosocial bonds between men, with always the implication that characters are somehow secretly homosexually related. We'll focus on these things instead of what made Shakespeare one of the greats, the bard, one of the greats in English literature throughout the past 400 years, which is the fact that he was able to capture the human condition. And we know that the human condition is fundamentally a moral one. And that the minute we abstract away from that, the minute we start focusing on these merely accidental characteristics of characters in Shakespeare's world, like the gender of Shylock's daughter, or maybe the homosexual subtext between certain characters in the play. The moment we abstract away from what makes literature truly worthwhile in terms of studying it, the moment humanities lose their relevance. It really baffles my mind why the humanities departments they don't seem to be able to discover why there's a declining interest in these kinds of studies.
Well, because they don't deal with morality, they deal with oppression. They deal with victimhood.
The humanities are dead, and academics killed it. To paraphrase Nietzsche concerning God, and I think the same thing has happened at Berkeley, right? The home of the free speech movement, the birthplace, the cradle of the free speech movement, has become its grave. Liberals and academics in general have built up the humanities, but at the same time they've also brought it to ruin. And I think until the public pushes against these people, until there is a backlash against the excessive Marxism espoused by academics in universities, and just the plain violence that we conservatives experience, until that happens, until alumni call up these universities and tell them that they're not going to donate to them anymore, until you hurt these universities and administrators in their pocketbooks, you're not going to see any kind of institutional reform.
As you know, I've been trying to advance the defund public schools hashtag, and in fact, Jason Hill, who wrote a book, We Have Overcome, he's going to be on the show in April 10th, I believe. But that's the only language they understand is power and the exercise of power, because that's all they're about. When they attack speakers on campus and shut them down violently, that's a power move.
Well, they view all politics as a game of power, and they view all of life as a game of power. Marx begins the process when he analyzes all of history as class struggle. That is, different groups of people in different economic situations battling it out in order to obtain political power or economic control.
The real insight I got from Scruton's book, Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands, was Scruton actually demonstrating how Karl Marx pulled off a coup d'etat academically by convincing academia that Marxism was a science.
That's true.
Very much like Auguste Comte, who invented sociology. Do you know what he first called his first iteration of sociology? It wasn't called sociology.
Was it positivism?
No, it wasn't even positivism. No, it was the science of society.
Science of society.
And then the Frankfurt School picks it up. This is why socialism is such a popular item, is because all of the academics that I know that are in administration in colleges and universities, I don't know of a single exception, they're all members of the Frankfurt School, descendants of the Frankfurt School, who actually believe that there is a science to socialization, that it's very much like physics or chemistry. And as anybody can tell you who's ever been involved in chemistry or physics or biology even, no, those are hard sciences. Sociology is not a hard science.
Well, I think even if you look at economics departments, most economists and academics in that discipline don't think highly of Marx. They actually think that his economic theories are outdated and or just incorrect. And now, I don't always trust economists. That the science is often inexact, but I definitely think that if you don't have the economists behind you, I don't see what justification you have for studying Marx. And a similar issue, the feminist academic Camille Paglia, I don't know if you've heard of her.
Oh, I'm going to have her on the show.
She, hopefully, it'd be a great conversation. She makes the point that a lot of these academics simply don't know economics, and they certainly don't know political philosophy. They don't know what a fascist is.
No.
And they also don't know history. If you look at writers like Michel Foucault, who is hugely influential in the humanities, he made these wild, baseless claims about certain historical periods on the scantiest of historical evidence. And really the problem with academia is bad scholarship, in addition to, as we discussed earlier, bad philosophy. I think that if academics held themselves to a higher standard in terms of scholarly research, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in today. Yeah,
there is an axiom in academic life these days, which is pretty well accepted. We were talking about this before, that last century's philosophy is this century's common sense. And who were the dominant forces in last century's philosophy? Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, and Ludwig Wittgenstein. These were the dominant three people. And out of that has evolved all of this notion that social sciences are actually sciences. I actually had a political science professor, of some renown, by the way, tell me, so I'm a scientist. I said, well, where's your lab coat? Are there justice molecules? Are there equity molecules? Are there equality? What laboratory do you go to every day to run your experiments on these things? Of course, you can't. But I mean, it's absurd, the idea that social sciences are sciences. That's fraud.
Well, this is a modern innovation. Historically, political science departments went under the name of politics, and the study of economics was political economy. In other words, there was an understanding in both of these disciplines that, one, they were inexact, which Aristotle admits, and two, ethics is the foundation of both politics and economics. Economics in the Greek, it refers to household management. So really the problem is there's been an attempt to amoralize the humanities, to deprive them and empty them of their moral content. And at this point in time, they've become entirely vacuous. And the unfortunate thing is this has allowed Marxism, which, make no mistake, it's a messianic movement deeply concerned with morality. It's jumped in to fill the void.
Did you know that back in the 60s and the 70s, there was no Department of Women's Studies? There was no Department of Ethnic Studies. There was no Department of Queer Studies. Now you can get a PhD in each of those things. A PhD.
Well,
it's like packing the Supreme Court. The way the liberal progressive Marxists have taken over academia is that they have expanded the number of disciplines. And therefore they hire more people, which means more administrators have to be hired to patrol people and watch people and to run the prison. So that's one way in which they have taken over. They have simply expanded. None of these disciplines existed before 1972.
Well, the inmates are now running the prison, and it's gotten to a point really where academics are focused on minutia, and so they'll create whole departments around the accidents of a person, and mistake these accidents for the essence. Historically, in the West, the chief concern of intellectuals has always been the essence of things, because that's what truly matters. And if your entire worldview is reducible to race and gender and sexuality, then I think you're, as Plato says, one of the lovers of the senses and lovers of the world, rather than focusing on higher, more divine things.
So we're coming to the end of the show. We're getting close to, I think I'll get a signal from the booth here, because the clock is broken in the studio. So I can't tell how much time we have. But I think we're coming up on about 5 or 10 minutes. If I'm wrong, just correct me. But where is this all going? I mean, you now have graduated from Berkeley. You're thinking about, what, going to law school perhaps?
Yes.
And I guess we'll have to save this for another telecast, because I hear the music creeping up on me. And thank you very much for listening, and thank you for being our guest on Freedom Matters. If you want to contribute to the production of the show, contact us and become a patron of the show here on Public Access, Channel 17, TVSB. Thanks a lot, Troy.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.